Hello, my name is Roger Sayles. I'm speaking to you today from San Rafael, Mendoza, Argentina, where I moved over 5 years ago because I understood what was coming to our country that most of you are living in and under this day. And through 22 years of very dedicated research personally, and through the 50 more years of my teachers, John Benson and Glenn Amborn, of 80 plus years of total dedication, brought you a year and a half ago this book. Many of you have heard me on the radio talking about this. Some of you have actually purchased and read the book, and some of you have been greatly moved by it, and the emails that I've gotten back are extremely humbling. So I thank you for connecting with the message, but the great majority of people have not connected with this message. As many of you know, I like quotes, and one of the great quotes was a Winston Churchill quote. And he said, "Once in every man's life, he usually stumbles across the truth. Most men pick themselves up, dust themselves off, and go on about their way." And that is what has happened in my experience, and in the 22 years, and especially the last 2.5 years that I've tried to get this message out, because I know how important it is. So this message is mainly tailored to one very brave and heroic young American that has given us an opportunity to shed ourselves of our parasitic benefactors. And this brave young man sits in the country of Russia today, stuck because his passport was revoked. And his name is Ed Snowden. Ed, this message is to you. Although it's tailored to all the American people, because this is your story too. And if your parents, like we're hoping Ed's are, and certainly I think the great probability is that they are, if your parents were natural-born Americans, you qualify simply by making your own personal declaration to reclaim your hereditament, to reclaim the great benefits that our forefathers founded our country on, fought to establish it with, and gave literally their lives, their fortunes, and their sacred honor to establish. And unfortunately, through treachery and deception, exactly as in the title of my book, the treachery and deception of words, it has been stolen from you by deceit. Now, many people in our movement, in our way of thinking, use the term illusion. But one thing we're going to have to do is we're going to have to try and fine-tune our thinking to where we're all on the same thought pattern. And the word illusion, although it's certainly accurate, is not fine-tuned. So from now on, we'll use the word simulation. Because what they've done, Ed, is they've simulated the original political status that was founded by our forefathers into a secondary political status that was created for the black man to give him political status as opposed to being a slave or property after the Civil War. What was technically done is that they took the black man off the southern plantation and they put him on the federal plantation with civil rights. And that is the simulation that you live today, where you think when you say you're a citizen of the United States, you think it's the original political status with constitutional protections, never constitutional rights, because your rights are from God, protected by the Constitution. And it is to God to which you owe your duty, because that's the thousands of year old legal formula. Wherever you receive the benefit or your rights, you owe the correlative duty. So, Ed, what I want to tell you today is that if your parents are American born, and if you take the declaration that's on your website, a U.S. passport, the number 4, ed.com, there's several examples there for you. If you get that notarized and submit it with a DS-11 form through the embassy in Moscow, they have to give you a U.S. passport. but it won't be the same as your other one that was revoked. It won't look any different. If you look real close at the language, you'll see inside that it says this document is for U.S. citizens / nationals. Because you see what they've done, Ed, is they've simulated the original God-given rights, duty owed, constitutionally protected political status that the people of America and the world still think you enjoy, and they've simulated it into one which makes you property and literally a slave of the federal government, and I will prove that to you momentarily. I have here an actual passport form that I picked up at the post office in Panama City, Florida, before I came to Argentina. And I wanted to use this to demonstrate to you and to the American people exactly what I'm talking about in the treachery and deception of these words. The question I would ask is this, and I don't know the answer. How many millions of people have filled out this simple DS-11 form and submitted it to the Secretary of State for a passport application in the last 50 years and never saw what I was able to see that jumped out at me right here? And let me read this to you. I'm not going to read all of it. I'm just going to read the first part of it because I believe you'll easily get the spirit of what it says. At the very top it says, application for U.S. passport, United States Department of State. Now, notice the large font and notice the very small font of what I'm going to read to you that is prefaced with bold capital letters, warning. And it says, false statements made knowingly and willfully in passport applications, including affidavits and other supporting documents submitted herewith, are punishable by fine, imprisonment, under the provisions of 18 U.S.C. ad sig, ad sig, ad sig, ad nauseum. So what they're really telling you here with this threatening language is that you have a choice. They don't tell you that in so many words unless you know how to read between the lines. So there's other clues in this document, but the most important thing by far is the one that you sign last. And in fact, not only do you sign it last, Ed, it also has very, very bold and striking language. Stop. Do not sign oath unless in presence of administering agent. And if the agent isn't there, they want you to go in front of a judge and sign it. So obviously, they're very serious about this oath, as they are all the oaths that we take. They're not very serious, it seems, about the oaths that they take. So let me read this, and we're going to put this on camera so that you can also read along with us. Once again, stop. Do not sign application until requested to do so by person administering oath. Now the oath says, I declare, under penalty of perjury, that I am a United States citizen, parentheses, or non-citizen national, close parentheses, and have not, since acquiring United States citizenship, parentheses, or U.S. nationality, close parentheses, performed any of the acts and conditions listed under acts or conditions on the reverse side of this application, parentheses, unless explanatory statement is attached, close parentheses. Again, I declare under penalty of perjury that the statements made on this application are true and correct. Now, my questions, if you are looking at this with me, fine-tune. Why are there two separate political statuses, either a citizen of the United States or a non-citizen citizen, national. Now those terms are what they call mutually exclusive. They have no relationship to each other because the second one is a non of the first one. So obviously they're different, and obviously they're distinct, and obviously they're important because they've mentioned it twice in this oath. But this is the real important thing that most people would never get unless they know the enemy as well as I do, is in the last part of the oath under the acts and conditions, it said if you violated any of those to attach a statement. But yet, when it comes to the important political status differences of two mutually exclusive political statuses, they tell you on the very front of the form, couched in warning language in ultra fine font. You don't think that's intentional, do you? Let me explain to you and the American people and people all over the world exactly what has happened. Is America, starting before the Civil War, where this obviously was planned, has been put into a Freemason trap. And you are the man that has allowed me to explain it. Because what you've done, Ed, is that you've gone into the triangle with the all-seeing eye, and you picked that eye out, and you exposed it to the world. And in doing so, I'm able to expose the entire rest of their scheme. And the first leg of this Babylonian three-sided trap was set into place after the Civil War when black men were given federal citizenship. And they gave them a secondary citizenship. And that's the first leg of the three-sided trap. The second leg of that trap was put in when the Federal Reserve Act was passed in 1913, allowing the money powers, of which so many famous people had made so many high-profile comments about, and they allowed them to take over the government. Then we had the Depression in the 1930s when the system of government was changed from the previous one that we had experienced for over 150 years, and a new system of law that we're not familiar with, but has a 1,000-year precedent, the feudal system from Europe, was brought into the country for the first time under the auspices or the guise of the 14th Amendment. This is not my opinion. On the website, Ed, a U.S. passport for, the number 4ed.com, we have the site from a very famous high-profile case in the United States Supreme Court. In fact, it's one of the most important cases that the Supreme Court has ever decided. It's not about blacks, it's about Chinese. And the case is U.S. versus Wong Kim Ark. And the decision, dissenting, not the majority, the minority, the dissenting opinion was written by the sitting Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, Chief Justice Fuller. And rather than read it here, I have it posted on the website because Chief Justice Fuller said exactly that in one of the most important cases ever decided by our High Court. And that is that the 14th Amendment brought the common law rule from England, which is the feudal system, into our country for the first time, just as England was being relieved of its inconvenience. And it laid there from the 1860s until the 1930s. And on March the 9th of 1933, when the United States was declared bankrupt, and the money powers took our gold and they substituted the people as collateral in this new feudal legal system that no one has ever recognized. If you go back to one of our important founding documents, the Declaration of Independence, personally, I think is the most important political document ever penned. And Thomas Jefferson in there lists the offenses against the king by the colonists. And one of the offenses right at the start is he has brought in a foreign jurisdiction. Do you think the feudal era and feudal law in the United States of America could be considered a foreign jurisdiction? You bet. Especially when it's hidden and disguised as masterfully as our traditional enemies have done. So the second leg was the government. The third leg after the Depression was set in place right at the start of World War II when everyone was distracted and no one is noticed. And they put the third blocking leg in by disguising the original citizen as a U.S. national. And the disguise that the entire country is under, Ed, and whoever may be listening to this morning or this evening or whenever you're viewing it, this is the simulation, is that you think you're free and you are literally in a legal system that is the feudal system with 1,000 years of legal precedent, where the most important thing is that you are property. Ed, and anyone who may be listening to this that is moved by this message, let me explain to you the two things that happen when you file a declaration and you submit it with a DS-11 form to the State Department. The first thing it does is it qualifies you to move back from civil rights, privileges, if you will, given to you by the federal government, to whom you owe the duty, and it moves you back over under God's rights with constitutional protections. So when that happens, the first thing is all of the administrative agency's jurisdiction sheds from you. The IRS, the OSHA, EPA, all of the other over 250 federal agencies that plague our country today. I mentioned a minute ago the statement from Thomas Jefferson about bringing in a foreign jurisdiction. The other statement that's in that list of grievances against the king is one that I committed to memory 20 years ago. And it could have been written yesterday. And it says, "He has erected multitudes of offices and sent hither swarms of officers to harass us and eat out our substance." Do you feel like your substance has been eaten out? Do you feel like you've been harassed? Those words could have been written yesterday. The same thing that we're dealing with today is the same thing our forefathers fought 250 years ago. Let me tell you part of the reason this message is so important to me is when I was in my 20s, because of my grandfather and his brother's genealogical interest and work, I was informed that the Sayles family was one of the original families that founded the country. They were on the Mayflower. And it wasn't as important to me then, in my 20s and earlier life, as it has become now in this project, because now my herediment's on the line. And if you want to use the colloquial term, I got a dog in this fight. Recently, I realized that my mother, being part American Indian, gave me 2 dogs in this fight because they didn't like being enslaved either. So this is important to me, and I think it's important to you, and I know it's important not only to our country, our future, but the entire future of the world hinges on this, because it's through this mechanism, Ed, and America, that our traditional enemies have taken control of our country first, and by the utilization of a debt money currency, the world. Ed, let me try and impress upon you and the others that are viewing and listening to this the importance of this concept of property. As the feudal era was brought in the 30s and imposed upon the American people, then as property, you are pledged for collateral for the bonds that back the world reserve currency. In 1933, when they took the gold, they substituted the people. And that's exactly what's happened here. Let me see if I can illustrate this point to you with an example that virtually everyone watching this has some familiarity with. And that's a legal document called a notice of lien from the Internal Revenue Service, the IRS. We call it a lien, and it operates legally as a lien. And when the IRS determines that you owe them money, and it's filed at the Property Records Office in the county where you live. And on that document are 3 pieces of information. The first is your name, the second is your address, and the third is the amount that you owe. Another triangle. Now, my question to you is this: how many millions of these liens have been filed? How many countless families have been torn up? People committed suicide, businesses lost, human family tragedies due to these liens. So let's analyze this very simple piece of paper just for 1 second, because on an IRS lien, those 3 pieces of paper, your name, your address, and whatever the amount is they've determined that you owe. What if you live in an apartment or a rental house? Because liens attach to property. And if you live in a rental house or an apartment, chances are you don't own that property. So my question becomes, what property is the lien on? And it doesn't take much deductive logic to come to the conclusion that the property the lien is placed on is your body. They own you. So if you file your declaration and a DS-11 form with the U.S. Department of State, 2 things happen simultaneously. You're pulled out from the administrative state because no more do the administrative agencies have jurisdiction over you. Their rules and regulations don't apply to you because they're only written for residents. And secondly, in the bowels of the Treasury Department, you are pulled out as collateral for the bonds that back the world reserve currency. One further thing for the lien to prove it to you is a commission that was commissioned by our president, Ronald Reagan, in the 80s. And Ronald Reagan was a big, big foe of big government, as many of you know and remember. And he commissioned a Grace Commission. And that's an official presidential report. You can look it up in any search engine. We prefer Start Page. And look at the Grace Commission's conclusions. And their conclusions were straightforward and simple. Not one single penny of your income tax goes to fund the day-to-day runnings of the government. It all goes to the bondholders because you're the collateral for the bonds they hold. This is absolutely bombshell information to some people, and it will shake you into a consciousness and a reality, and that we hope a fine-tuned way of thinking and living our collective lives. So it very well may be that today is Revelation 18. Babylon may very well fall in an hour today. And if you look at that long verse at the end of the list of things that merchants can't sell, the very last thing is bodies and souls of men. People, they can't sell you and own you unless you're their property. Let's put an end to this. Let's get these 300-year cycle parasites off of our backs and out of our lives and out of our country. Thank you.